Welcome to The Explainer. If you just look around, it's pretty easy to feel like our world is just caught in this giant knot of problems. Experts are even calling it a polycrisis, this tangled mess of crises all hitting us at once. So today, we're going to dig in and ask, what if these aren't a bunch of separate problems? What if they're all just symptoms of one single hidden driver? And the symptoms, well, they're pretty stark. In 2024, for the very first time, our planet officially crossed the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming threshold. Now, scientists have been warning us for decades that this is the tipping point, the line we really don't want to cross for triggering catastrophic, irreversible climate change. Well, we're here now.
And at the exact same time, we're seeing this absolutely staggering ecological collapse. This number, -73%, that's the average drop in monitored wildlife populations since just 1970. Let's be clear, this isn't just a decline. The scientific consensus is that this is the sixth mass extinction event in Earth's history, and it's being driven entirely by us.
This downward trend isn't just in nature, it's happening in our political systems too. For 18 straight years, global freedom has been on the decline. In 2023 alone, 52 countries, 52, saw their democratic rights and civil liberties get worse. This isn't some random blip, it's a sustained global trend. And when you look at the economy, the picture is just as jarring. In a single year, the 500 richest people on the planet added $2.2 trillion to their wealth. Meanwhile, the total number of people living in poverty, it's barely changed since 1990. So none of these things are happening in a vacuum. Experts call this a polycrisis, and the idea is really simple. These aren't separate problems, they're all part of one big, tangled system where each crisis just makes the others worse. So think about it, right? Climate change messes up food supplies, which forces people to migrate, which puts a huge strain on political systems, which then makes it impossible for those systems to agree on how to fix climate change. It's just this vicious feedback loop. So you have to ask the question, right? If all these crises are connected, maybe they're just symptoms. Is there something deeper going on, some root cause that's tying all of this together? To find the answer, the thinking goes, we have to look deeper than our failing systems. We have to peel back the layers of economics and politics and look at the invisible operating system that's running our whole culture. And that operating system is what some call the deep structure. Think of it like the hidden rules of a game you don't even know you're playing. It's this set of background assumptions and metaphors that we just take for granted as reality. But they're not reality. They're cultural ideas that silently shape everything. What we think is possible, what we think is valuable, even what we think is real. And this is the code at the heart of that deep structure. It's built on these pairs of opposites. But look closely. They're not equal. One side is always seen as better, as privileged, while the other side is seen as less than or subordinated. So human is seen as above nature, mind over body, the self over the other. And as thinkers like the philosopher Razi Braidotti have pointed out for a long time, this structure creates a very specific idea of the perfect human, the man of reason. This is someone who sees themselves as separate from the world, totally autonomous, and basically entitled to control and master everything else. It feels universal, but it's a really narrow, specific cultural idea. Okay, so that's the invisible code. But how does a set of ideas like that actually build the concrete, physical world that we all live in? Well, it happens through a kind of chain reaction. First, you have the deep structure, that core idea of separation. That idea gives birth to narratives, to stories, like the story that nature is just a resource for us to use. Those stories then shape our perception. They change how we see the world. That perception then guides our actions. And finally, all those individual actions add up and build our material reality, our laws, our cities, our entire economic system. And here's the result. Our entire world, from the highways we build to the legal codes we write, it literally becomes the physical expression, like a fossil, of the stories we've been telling ourselves for hundreds of years. So what happens when that reality, the one built by our old stories, starts to very visibly fall apart? What happens when the story just doesn't fit the world anymore? This is where things get really interesting, because this is where change becomes possible. See, a fragile system tries to ignore the breakdowns. It just doubles down on the old story that's clearly not working. But when a system gets to a critical point, It starts to see those breakdowns as signals, as proof that the old story is failing. And that opens up a door to a transformational state, where a totally new, more resilient story can finally start to take hold. Now, I know this might all sound a bit abstract, so to make it really concrete, let's look at two amazing real-world examples of this exact kind of transformation in action. First up, let's talk about land. The dominant story we all grew up with is that land is property, something to be bought, sold, and exploited. This idea is so normal to us, it's hard to even see it as just an idea. But it's that very story that has led to so much ecological destruction and social injustice. But check this out. A new story is starting to emerge. This number, 409, is the number of rights of nature initiatives that have popped up in 39 countries. These are actual legal frameworks that are completely rewriting the story. They recognize ecosystems not as objects to be owned, but as living subjects with their own legal rights. And you can actually see this new story changing the physical world. Just look at South Africa. Since the end of apartheid, a new story about land justice has driven reforms that have boosted Black farmland ownership from just 10% up to 25% today. The story changes, and the world literally follows suit. And for an example that happened way, way faster, just look at the Blackfish effect. For decades, the story was that animals were a form of entertainment property. And then one documentary, Blackfish, came along and just shattered that narrative by showing the brutal reality. The speed at which the old story collapsed was just incredible. Now get this, the financial hit from that one story changing was unbelievable. A $76,000 film changed the public story so deeply that it helped wipe out over $832 million of shareholder value in a single day. That's the power we're talking about. That's a new story breaking through. So, let's tie this all together. The big takeaway here is that our crises aren't random. They are symptoms of a deep, old cultural story, one that's built on separation. That story literally built the world we live in, but it's failing now. The breakdowns we see all around us aren't the end. They're signals. They're an opening for new stories to come in and start creating new realities. And that really leaves us with one final, powerful question. The evidence is all around us. Our old stories are crumbling. They just can't hold up against reality anymore. So the only real question left is, what new stories are we going to choose to tell to build the future we actually want to live in?